Hi, hope you're well. And did you know that for as long as humanity has been alive, and even longer than we've been able to create written records, there's been art? Be this in arrangements of stones or cave paintings, even in very crude forms, we've always yearned for a way to express what we can't really put into words. There's loads of reasons why people make art, this kind of self expression, also connection with other people. It's a very human thing, in my opinion, to make art. In fact, I don't really think you could go a whole day without seeing some kind of byproduct of art. I mean, it even shows in architecture, in cars, and the food you eat. Film, I'd say, is a lot more obvious of an outlet of art. You've got romances, comedies, dramas. These things seek to express certain emotions like sadness and pain and even anger. Then there's other films, sometimes other pieces of media too. They seek to portray a different kind of emotion, that being fear. Horror, I think, can make for a form of art that is very potent, and you probably know it mostly from scary movies and scary games, but there's also a certain niche for it carved out in more physical art forms, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. While these works don't have loud jump scares they're throwing at you, they can still be really disturbing and thought-provoking. We're going to be talking about a couple art pieces here in this video, but the first one I want to talk about is one you've probably already heard of. That being Can't Help Myself, made by a couple of Beijing-based artists in 2016. Can't Help Myself was originally commissioned for the Guggenheim Museum of Art in 2016, but went on to receive worldwide attention due to internet popularity. It features an industrial machine in a polycarbonate enclosure with a number of sensors and software that helps it with a single task, that being to keep itself surrounded by a deep crimson liquid. The robot has a number of animations to help it maneuver the enclosure and best sweep up the liquid, but the process leaves a lot of the liquid either being smudged onto the floor or splattered against the walls of the enclosure. In videos, its loud mechanical whirring can also be heard, almost like an animal protesting its cage. The intended narrative for this piece is a rather socio-political one, and while left up to a bit of interpretation among different spaces, one of the main topics this work seeks to symbolize is border control and issues surrounding migration. The red hue of the liquid the robot pushes around, and in turn also smears and splatters on the walls, is a representation of the true, more violent nature that certain means of furthering political agendas and better monitoring a population can have. I'll be real, as for my personal thoughts, I don't really have a lot of experience personally in socio-political conflicts, so while it is incredibly real of a subject matter to be covering with this art piece, there's also another kind of narrative that you can get from this work of art that I kind of subscribe to more just because it feels more personal to me. This narrative takes kind of more of a mental approach, and I think that's kind of the narrative that became popular online. A lot of people I've seen that kind of comment on this machine online have noted that the mechanical whirring it makes is kind of sad. They also note that over the years that this exhibition was put in place in the museum, it just got messier and messier as this machine continuously tried to sweep up this liquid. The machine's desire to scoop up this liquid is something that's programmed into it. It really can't control that it feels the need to do it. But the thing is, this machine is entirely electric. Sweeping up this liquid isn't keeping it alive at all, and really the only thing this movement does is make a mess of everything. Like its title, it just kind of can't help itself, and I think that's kind of weirdly relatable for a lot of people. I think a lot of people have either been in a situation where they feel like they can't really get out of it, or they can't help themselves from doing a certain self-destructive thing, or I think there's also a level of relatability too for people who were maybe around someone who couldn't help themselves, seeing someone self-destruct as an outsider, that can also be very disturbing and traumatic at times, especially in the context of abuse. While it's definitely no jump scare, I think this work is definitely thought-provoking and disturbing and grim and all the things, but there's still more to come, so moving on. The Giant Pink Bunny is a huge sculpture installed at the top of a hill in Artesina, Italy. As its name implies, it's a giant pink bunny made of wool and hay, and sits at 200 feet long and 20 feet high. The creative minds behind the work, an art collective group sourced in Vienna, Austria, were inspired to create something reminiscent of the novel Gulliver's Travels, and actively encouraged anyone who found themselves on this hill with a giant stuffed animal to climb on top of it and interact with it how they saw fit. When this work was first displayed on the hill in 2005, the side of the rabbit's body had a number of colorful shapes streaming from it to represent its entrails. The artist had determined for it to actually decompose, however, it wouldn't be for another 20 years. Through the years, though, satellite mapping has been able to document its more rapid disintegration. In 2017, it disappeared from maps for good, and today, not even a spot of bare earth remains where it once laid. I think the most interesting thing about this art piece is the way it decomposed over the years. And while I do think it's really oddly beautiful in a way, it's also very disturbing, and the theme of the art piece itself has some pretty dark implications. Of course, because this bunny was made at first with entrails kind of spewing out of its side, it was kind of intended in the design that it would decompose over time. The fact that it was made to rot and wither away, and it did so much faster than they could have ever expected it to, is kind of almost sadistic in a way. But I also think there's something to be said in the way that how something so big, even bigger than us, can vanish so quickly. Something about how even something that's so much bigger than us can still be completely temporary, and when it rots away, the world just keeps moving on like it was never even there. It's almost existential in a way, and I think that kind of lends a very profound nature to this piece, but there's still more to come, so we'll move on to the next one. Tobias Bradford is not the name of a single piece, but rather an artist who has made a number of works that challenge how comfortable we may be with modern art. His work consists mainly of physical sculptures, most of which are animated with moving mechanical parts. Some of his pieces over the past 7 years, however, are outliers to me, because of not only their subject matter, but their execution. The most tame of these is entitled Spillage, Releasing Forever, from 2022. It depicts a room with a few furnishings, but on the table is a coffee mug that seems to leak the dark liquid endlessly. Coffee runs off the table and drips down onto the pool of coffee that licks at the bottom of the furniture and walls of the exhibit. Everything the dark liquid touches is stained. Another work from the same year is entitled The Softness. This is one of his most popular pieces, which depicts a set of legs with a hand and a razor. The hand moves back and forth over a spot of shaved skin on the leg over and over again, like it can't seem to get a close enough shave, and yet it persists, covering the same spot again and again, risking getting cut in favor of achieving the softness it desires. In 2017, Tobias Bradford also created a piece entitled Slow Rot. The sculpture functions as a fountain in humanoid shape, with the water leaking from its face and collecting in a bucket beneath the chair it slumps into. A light box on the wall beside it depicts the shadow of a humanoid figure. The room is bare, isolating the figure in the chair, and its body is white, spare for the parts where the fountain pours from it and the growth that emerge from it. For all of Tobias Bradford's work I've seen, I've never gotten much in the terms of him explaining what he intended for these pieces to mean. I kind of like that, though, if I'm going to be honest, because a big thing about art for me is that it can be left up to personal interpretation. And if I'm going to be honest, I think when it comes to finding a piece of art that resonates the most personally with you, it is best when it's left up to your own interpretation. That's why when I try to put a narrative to these works, I kind of take a more mental, philosophical kind of approach. It's probably kind of obvious already what I think they're portraying, just based off how I wrote the descriptions for them, but for the Spillage, I feel like the narrative here is that grief and pain can kind of feel unfathomably deep, kind of endless in a way. In the Softness, I see kind of this portrayal of someone pursuing something they want so bad, but it could inevitably lead to pain. And in Slow Rot, I kind of see how isolation can function as kind of a premature death. I'm also just personally a fan of how a lot of his sculptures are just kind of objectively a little uncomfortable to look at, and I think that kind of lends to challenging what it means to make an art piece, and I think that's also pretty profound. But I do think when art pieces deal with things like mental health or philosophy, or specifically the negative sides of those things, that is where I find it the most disturbing, because that is where a lot of my personal experiences lie. That's something I wanted to talk about, but I couldn't really find a good way to put this in the video. So I'll just talk about it for just a second here. Take things like Unfiction and ARGs, for example, other websites like that. I don't think all of them really intend to be super profound. A lot of them do just try to make a scary story just for fun. Like Marble Hornets, for example, it started off as just some people having fun making a film project, but I think the communities they can gather can really have certain people in them that try to find deeper meaning within these stories. Even if the creators of these works intend for their story to be received one certain way, there's really no telling how one person can interpret it personally. This can be for better and for worse, which is something I'm going to talk about in a future video, but I think that's kind of the beauty of it, the fact that art is so up to interpretation. If you couldn't tell by me making a whole video on this, I do like creative stuff, art specifically, even if I don't make a lot of time to go seek it out. But I like to think that just means there's more good art for me to go find in the future, so I'm not really missing out on anything, I'm just putting it off for later. If there are any cool art pieces that you think fits this theme, I would love to hear about them down below. And if art and disturbing horror things like this interest you, I would encourage you to seek it out too. And if any of the pieces I talked about today are new to you, I have some links down below that has more information about each of them, so feel free to check that out as well. But that is going to be enough out of me for today, so I will see you next week. Later.